For 38 years, I showed up to every single family event, every reunion, every holiday, every birthday party I didn't want to be at. This year I said no for the first time. The fallout was so disproportionate, so revealing, so nakedly about control and nothing else, that I am still sitting with what it taught me about the people I called family. I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not a difficult person. I say that not defensively, not to preempt whatever verdict you might be forming, but because it is the factual context without which nothing that follows will make sense. I am 38 years old. I have a job I'm good at. I have friends who have known me for decades and who would describe me, I think, as reliable, thoughtful, and easy to be around. I am not someone who creates drama. I am not someone who makes things difficult for the pleasure of it. I've spent the majority of my adult life being, if anything, too agreeable, too quick to show up when I didn't want to, too willing to absorb discomfort to preserve someone else's comfort, too practiced at rearranging my face into an expression of enjoyment when what I was actually feeling was a specific, bone-deep exhaustion that I didn't have a name for yet. I have been to every family event for 38 years. Let me tell you what that means in practical terms. It means I have driven 4 hours round trip to a cousin's second birthday party that I was obligated to attend because my aunt would be devastated if I wasn't there. It means I have taken 4 days of paid time off, time I could not get back, time I needed, time that cost me, to attend a family reunion at a lake house that smelled like mildew and featured 3 days of my uncle's political monologues and a potato salad that gave me food poisoning. It means I have rescheduled work trips, canceled plans with friends, postponed medical appointments, and once, and I want you to sit with this, once attended a family Christmas dinner 48 hours after a procedure that left me in genuine physical pain because my mother said it would ruin everything if I wasn't there. I showed up every time for 38 years. And then this past July, I said no. Just once. Just the one time. I'm not going to be able to make it this year. What followed was the most clarifying 6 weeks of my adult life. Not because of what my family said, though what they said was extraordinary, but because of what their reaction revealed in perfect, unambiguous, high-definition clarity about what my attendance had always actually meant to them. It had never been about wanting me there. It had been about wanting me manageable. Let me tell you about the Kowalski family reunion because you need to understand what I was saying no to. My mother's family, the Kowalskis, though I'll use that loosely, is large, loud, geographically spread across 4 states, and absolutely devoted to the idea of itself. The family, capital F, is the organizing mythology of my mother's entire identity. It is the lens through which she processes everything: success, failure, joy, grief, conflict, love. To be a Kowalski, in my mother's framework, is to be part of something larger than yourself, something that demands loyalty and presence and the regular, ritual performance of togetherness, and something that will, if you perform correctly, love you back in a way that makes all the performances worth it. I want to be fair. There are people in this family I genuinely like. My cousin Daria, who is my age and has the same quiet, slightly tired look in her eyes that I suspect I have at family events. My great-aunt Stella, who is in her 80s, tells stories about her life in the 50s that I would listen to for hours, and who is one of the only people at these gatherings who ever asks me a question about my life and waits for the full answer. An uncle by marriage, Tom, who always brings good wine and stands by the grill with me in companionable silence and seems to understand, without it ever being stated, that we are both people who are here because we love specific individuals and are tolerating the event around them. But the family as a collective organism, as a system, that is a different thing. The family as a system is governed by a small number of loud, central personalities, chief among them my Aunt Patricia. Patricia is my mother's older sister. She is 64, she is formidable, and she runs the Kowalski family reunion with the organizational precision of a military campaign and the emotional subtlety of a foghorn. She books the venue. She designs the t-shirts. Yes, there are shirts every year in a new color with the family name and the year printed on the back. She sends the invitations. She manages the RSVP spreadsheet. She assigns the potluck dishes and she delivers, via my mother, a running commentary on everyone's level of participation and commitment that functions less like family communication and more like a loyalty audit. Patricia has opinions about everything. She has opinions about when you arrive and when you leave and what you bring, and whether you seem happy enough while you're there, and whether your happiness seems genuine or performative, and God help you if she decides it's the latter. She has been at the center of more family conflicts than I can count, and in every single one of them, through a combination of volume, persistence, and the strategic deployment of my mother as an emotional intermediary, she has emerged as the wronged party. She is, to put it plainly, exhausting. She is the kind of person who makes an event about herself while loudly insisting it's about everyone else. And every single year, the reunion is at its core, beneath the potato salad and the t-shirts and the lawn games, about Patricia. Her vision, her execution, her need to be seen as the person who holds the family together. This year's reunion was scheduled for the third weekend in July. A lakeside campground about 2.5 hours from me, rented for the full weekend, Friday evening through Sunday afternoon. Mandatory attendance expected from Friday dinner. 23 family members, various spouses and children. 2 dogs that were not supposed to come, but always do. I had gone every year for the past 11 years since moving within driving distance. This year I said no. I want to tell you why, because the why matters and because it is less dramatic than you might expect, and I think that non-drama is important. There was no specific incident. There was no blow-up at last year's reunion, no particular thing that Patricia said, no moment of crystallizing humiliation that I can point to and say, that is the day I decided. It was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to explain, because of its quietness. What happened is that this spring, around March or April, I started being honest with myself. I had started seeing a therapist in January, my first serious attempt at therapy, something I'd put off for years for reasons that were mostly just fear dressed up as busyness. And my therapist, who is a calm, precise woman named Dr. Okafor, who asks questions that seem simple until you try to answer them, had been gently, persistently asking me to pay attention to my own reactions to things. Not to manage them, not to reframe them, just to notice them and take them seriously. And what I started noticing, when I paid attention without immediately overriding myself, was that my body's response to the family reunion was indistinguishable from dread. Not mild reluctance. Not the low-grade social anxiety that I think most people feel before large gatherings. Dread. The kind that arrives weeks in advance, a weight settling into my chest sometime in June that didn't lift until I was back in my own apartment Sunday night, and that some years didn't fully lift even then. The kind that produced, reliably, a 3-day headache every year for the reunion weekend. The kind that had me, last year, sitting in my car in the campground parking lot for 15 minutes before I went in, doing the specific kind of deep breathing that is less about relaxation and more about convincing your nervous system that the threat isn't real. When I told Dr. Okafor about this in April, described the dread, the headaches, the parking lot breathing, she asked me, what would happen if you didn't go? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't have an answer. I had never seriously considered not going. The possibility existed in the same theoretical category as flying, technically conceivable, practically outside my actual life. Of course I would go. I always went. Not going was not a thing that happened. She said, I'm not telling you not to go. I'm asking you to notice that you have a choice. I drove home that day and thought about it for 2 months. I made lists, in my head, of reasons to go. Daria would be there, and Aunt Stella. The wine Tom always brought. The lake, which was genuinely beautiful in the early morning before anyone else was up. I made lists of reasons not to go. 3 days of performing enjoyment in a context that reliably depleted me to zero. Patricia's commentary, delivered directly and through my mother, on every choice I made and didn't make during those 3 days. The t-shirts, the political opinions, the potato salad that had twice now been a biohazard. And then I sat with the deeper question, which was not really about the reunion at all. What do I actually owe this family and why? I didn't have a clean answer, but I knew, with a certainty that had taken almost 40 years to accumulate, that the answer was not everything, unconditionally, regardless of the cost to yourself, forever. In June, I texted my mother, I'm not going to be able to make it to the reunion this year. I'm sorry for the short notice. I hope everyone has a wonderful time. I set my phone down. I made dinner. I watched something forgettable on television. And then my phone started ringing. My mother called within 4 minutes of the text. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail, which I listened to later, was my mother's voice cycling rapidly through concern, confusion, and something that was trying very hard to sound like gentle disappointment, but had the unmistakable undertone of alarm. Not alarm that I was unwell, but alarm that the system had malfunctioned. She called the next morning. I answered that one. The conversation lasted almost an hour, and I want to walk you through it carefully because it is a masterclass in the specific tactics of a family that has never had to negotiate with a member who said no. It began with concern. Are you okay? Is something wrong? Did something happen? This is phase 1, the possibility that my refusal had a legitimate external cause, something that could be fixed or addressed, something that would allow me to recant without anyone having to acknowledge that I had simply chosen not to come. I told her I was fine. Nothing had happened. I just needed a quiet weekend. Phase 2 arrived quickly. The reasonableness offensive. My mother began explaining, very calmly, how much the reunion meant to the family, how much it would mean to Aunt Stella, who was getting older, how Daria had specifically said she was looking forward to seeing me, how it was just one weekend, just 3 days, and surely I could manage 3 days. I said I understood and that I was still not coming. Phase 3. The escalation to consequences. This one was delivered carefully, framed as information rather than threat, but the message was clear. Patricia would be very hurt. There would be questions. People would notice I wasn't there. It might create complications for future family events if I established a pattern of absence. I said I understood and that I was still not coming. My mother was quiet for a moment, and then she said, with a specific kind of tiredness in her voice that I recognized as genuine, not tactical, but real, I just don't understand why you would want to miss this. And here is the thing I said that I think surprised her. I said, I know you don't, and I'm not sure I have the right words to explain it in a way that would land. But the fact that you can't imagine wanting to miss it is part of what I've been thinking about. She didn't know what to do with that. We ended the call without resolution, which was a new experience for both of us. Patricia called the next day. I want to take a moment to describe what it means to receive a phone call from Patricia, because it is a particular experience. Patricia does not call to have a conversation. Patricia calls to conduct a proceeding. There is an agenda, there is a tone, and there is a predetermined conclusion that you are expected to arrive at by the end of the call, and if you don't arrive at it, the call will simply continue until you do, or until one of you hangs up. She opened by telling me she'd heard I wasn't coming to the reunion. I confirmed this. She asked why. I said I needed a quiet weekend. She said, and I want to quote this as accurately as I can because I've repeated it to enough people that I've got it memorized. She said, a quiet weekend. You're telling me that a quiet weekend is more important than your family. There it was. The reframe. Not, we'd love to have you there. Not, we'll miss you. But the immediate, unqualified assertion that choosing a quiet weekend over the reunion was a statement about my values. A ranking. A declaration that I placed personal comfort above family loyalty. I said, I'm saying I need some time to myself this summer. I'm not making a statement about anything. She said, everything is a statement. Showing up is a statement. Not showing up is a statement. I thought about this for a second and then said, okay. Then my statement is that I need rest. Patricia's voice changed. It got quieter, which with Patricia is always more alarming than loud. She said, I've spent 30 years organizing this family. I have put in time and money and effort that no one fully appreciates. The least people can do is show up. And there it was, the thing beneath the thing. The reunion was not about family togetherness. The reunion was about Patricia's investment requiring a return. 30 years of organization, and our presence was not a gift we were choosing to give. It was a debt we were required to pay. I said gently, I appreciate everything you do for the family, Patricia. I'll see everyone at Christmas. I ended the call. She called back twice. I didn't answer. What happened over the following 3 weeks was something I can only describe as a coordinated pressure campaign, and I want to document it carefully because I think the documentation is important, not for any legal reason, but because one of the ways families maintain control over people who have always complied is by making each individual contact seem reasonable in isolation. The calls from your mother checking in, the text from your cousin saying they'll miss you, the voicemail from the uncle asking if everything's okay. Each one, alone, seems like normal human concern. Together, there's something else. Over 3 weeks, I received 11 phone calls from my mother, 4 from Patricia, 2 from my Aunt Linda, who I speak to maybe twice a year, and who I suspect was deployed specifically because her voice is very gentle and hard to resist. 1 from my cousin Marcus, who I like and who sounded genuinely uncomfortable making the call, like he'd been asked to do it and couldn't find a graceful way out. 2 texts from Daria. One that said, "I really hope you'll reconsider. It won't be the same without you," which I believe was sincere, and 1 3 days later that said, "Patricia's really upset," which I believe was less about Daria's feelings and more about the information Patricia wanted delivered. A letter. An actual, physical, handwritten letter from my mother, mailed to my apartment, for pages long, covering her feelings about family, the importance of showing up, memories of my childhood at previous reunions, a gentle suggestion that I might be depressed or overwhelmed and should perhaps speak to someone, and a closing paragraph that said she loved me and hoped I would reconsider. I held that letter for a while. My mother's handwriting is very familiar, and seeing it on 4 pages of her good stationery did something to my chest that I hadn't been prepared for. Not guilt, exactly. Grief, maybe. For the version of this I wished we had, the one where she wrote to ask how I was, what I was feeling, what she could do. Not to lobby me back into the system, but just to know me. I wrote her back. 1 page. I told her I loved her, and I was not depressed, and I would see her soon, and that I hoped the reunion was wonderful. I did not change my mind. The reunion happened the 3rd weekend of July. I went for a long run Saturday morning. Made a breakfast I actually wanted to eat. Spent the afternoon reading in the sun outside a coffee shop I'd been meaning to try for months. Had dinner with 2 friends, one of whom I hadn't seen since winter. Slept 9 hours. Sunday morning I sat with my coffee and thought about what was happening 2.5 hours north of me. The t-shirts, the lawn games, Patricia's clipboard, the political monologues, the potato salad. I thought about the Mildew Lake House smell. I thought about sitting in the parking lot doing breathing exercises. And I felt I want to be precise about this, not guilty. Not relieved, exactly. Something more interesting than either of those. Something like the feeling of taking off shoes that were too tight and having that specific awareness of your own feet that you'd stop noticing. I felt like myself. The reunion ended Sunday afternoon. By Sunday evening, my phone had started again. My mother called. Her voice was different from the lobbying calls, flatter, with a kind of weighted quality that I associated with bad news being carefully packaged. She said the reunion had been a little tense. She said Patricia had made some comments. She said people had noticed I wasn't there and had asked questions. I said I hoped the good parts were good. She said, "Patricia said some things at dinner Saturday night that I think you should probably know about." Here is what Patricia had said at dinner Saturday night, at a table of 17 family members, including children. That my absence was selfish. That I had always been a little selfish, actually in ways the family had tolerated out of love. That I thought I was better than everyone else, which was why I'd moved away, and why I didn't come around, and why I had, in her words, decided this family isn't good enough for me anymore. That she felt sorry for my mother. That some people in this world take from their families and then walk away the moment they're asked to give something back, and she didn't want to name names, but everyone knew who she meant. 17 people, including my cousin's children, the youngest of whom is 8. My mother told me all of this in the careful, pained tone of someone who knows that what they're delivering is a grenade, but has decided that delivering it is the right thing to do. I think she thought I would be hurt. I think she expected me to be upset, to cry, or to get angry, or to have the kind of reaction that opens a negotiation back up. What I felt instead was a vast, clarifying calm. Because here is what Patricia had just done. She had taken my one instance of not showing up, 1 out of 38 years of showing up, and used it to publicly deliver a verdict about my character that she had apparently already formed and simply been waiting for a justification to announce. The absence was not the cause of what she'd said. The absence was the permission slip. She had been holding that speech in reserve. And that meant that every year I had come, every year I had driven 4 hours and worn the t-shirt and eaten the potato salad and breathed in the parking lot, none of it had been enough. It was never going to be enough because her regard for me was not based on what I did. It was based on whether I was manageable, whether I was controllable, whether I would stay inside the lines she'd drawn. The 1 year I stepped outside them, she told my family I was selfish and that she felt sorry for my mother. That was the answer to the question I hadn't known I was asking. I called Daria the following week. Daria was there Saturday night. She heard the speech. She said she'd been uncomfortable and hadn't known what to do. I believed her and I wasn't angry at her. She lives inside that system too, and untangling herself from it is not a fast or simple process. But I asked her, directly, how people had responded. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, most people kind of nodded, or didn't react. You know how it is when Patricia gets going. It's easier to just let it pass. I asked if anyone had pushed back. She said, Tom said that's a bit much and Patricia ignored him. And Aunt Stella left the table. She said she was tired, but she didn't come back for the rest of dinner. Tom, who brings good wine and stands by the grill. And Aunt Stella, who is 83 and asks real questions and waited for the full answers. The 2 people in that family who I would genuinely miss. I told Daria I loved her. I told her I hoped we'd find ways to stay close outside of the reunion context. She said she'd like that. I think she meant it, and I think she also knows the way you know things in families like ours without quite saying them, that something has shifted. Here is where I am now, 2 months later. I have spoken to my mother several times since the reunion. The conversations are different. Not warm exactly. There is a constraint between us that wasn't there before, or maybe was always there, and I'm only now feeling it because I've stopped patting it. But we are talking. She has not apologized for what Patricia said, or for any of the lobbying calls, or for the letter. I have not asked her to. I am trying to figure out what I want this relationship to look like. What is possible, what is good for me, what is honest. And I am doing that slowly and without rushing to a resolution I don't yet have. I have not spoken to Patricia. She sent me a text about 2 weeks after the reunion that said, "Hope all is well. We missed you this year." I read it 4 times trying to figure out if she was being sincere or strategic, and eventually concluded that it didn't matter and that I didn't need to respond. I have not spoken to most of my extended family. I suspect there are ongoing conversations about me. I have made my peace with the fact that I cannot control what those conversations contain. I have spoken to Tom, who called me a week after the reunion, said he'd heard what happened and wanted to check in, and spent 15 minutes telling me about a fishing trip he took in August that sounded genuinely peaceful. He didn't offer analysis or advice or a verdict on the family situation. He just called to say hello and tell me about the fish. I almost cried, which sounds absurd, but I think what I was reacting to was the simplicity of it. Here is a person calling not because there is a problem to manage, but because he thought of me. That is, apparently, enough to undo me right now. Aunt Stella called too. Shorter call because she tires easily. She said, "I heard you didn't come this year. Good for you." And before I could respond, she told me about the garden she'd been working on all summer, and I listened, and it was one of the better 20 minutes I've had in a long time. I've been thinking about what I want to say at the end of this, and I keep arriving at the same place. I used to believe that showing up was how I proved I belonged. That attendance was the currency of love in my family, that if I came enough times, to enough things, with enough apparent enjoyment, I would eventually have made the deposit that secured my belonging permanently. That one day my account would be full, and I could rest. What the reunion taught me, what Patricia's Saturday night speech taught me, what 38 years of parking lot breathing exercises taught me, is that there is no full account. Not in a family that runs on control rather than love. In a system like that, your presence is not appreciated. It is expected. It is extracted. And the moment you withhold it, even once the mask slips and you see, with perfect clarity, that you were never a person to them. You were a function. a piece of the machinery. And machinery that stops working gets replaced or blamed, never understood. I missed one reunion.
1.
Out of 38 years. And for one missed weekend, I was declared selfish, ungrateful, and too good for my family at a dinner table with children present by a woman who I had shown up for year after year, wearing her t-shirts and eating her potato salad and driving 4 hours and breathing in parking lots. That is not love. That is not family. That is a system of control, wearing love's vocabulary. And I am done performing my way through it. I'm not going to ask if I was the asshole. I already know the answer. What I want to ask, what I keep turning over, in the quiet of my apartment, in the particular piece of a life that is slowly becoming mine, is this. How many of you have been breathing in parking lots? How many of you have driven 4 hours to events you dreaded, worn someone else's t-shirts, eaten food that made you sick, and called it love? How many of you are exhausted in a way that the people exhausting you would never describe as exhaustion? They'd call it family, they'd call it loyalty, they'd call it what we do. How many years have you been showing up for people who would publicly dismantle your character the one year you didn't? I am not telling you what to do. I am barely telling myself what to do. But I am telling you, the parking lot breathing is data. The dread is data. The 3-day headaches are data. You are allowed to read it. For Aunt Stella, who left the table, and for Tom, who brought good wine and told me about the fish. Some people in every family are worth keeping. The work is figuring out how to keep them without keeping everything that comes with them. Update: I've been asked several times whether I'll go next year. I honestly don't know. What I know is that if I go, it will be because I chose to, not because I was lobbied into it, not because the cost of not going felt too high, not because I couldn't bear disappointing someone. If I go, I'll go as a person making a decision. That's new. That might sound small. It doesn't feel small.